Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and today for a big change on the Piracy Show, we are going to be talking about piracy and what piracy needs to actually exist, and why it might be further away than we think. Now, recently a joke was made about me. It's like, well, you're more of a smuggler than a pirate, and it's like, yeah, that's true. There is no piracy to be had. Now, it goes beyond the idea of a simple inclusion of a tractor beam. Okay, well, now we have piracy. Not quite. We got close to piracy once before. And many of you will know what I'm referring to is in the past in Star Citizen, I think around 3.3 or 3.4, we would get interdicted and attacked by pirate caterpillars. And when you blew them up, they would spill their cargo into space. And then you could retrieve that cargo and you could sell it. But it all came in the small individual carryable packages, and you had to kind of bring them into your ship one by one, or you had to open up a door and then try to maneuver your ship around the wreck and try to scoop up all the boxes as they kind of fell into the gravity well of your ship, which was sometimes productive, sometimes a lot of times frustrating. And that was the closest we ever got to actual piracy in the game, though that was ultimately removed. And the reason why it was removed wasn't because, like, oh, it's not fulfilling the vision, it's not it's not systemic, it's not bespoke, it was no reason like that. It was because it was killing the servers, and that was a big problem in those days, is that the servers would just up and die. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. But in order to get piracy, it goes beyond sort of like the tractor beam effect that you see on the buggy, because I want to be clear, even though it's just like, okay, here we have a tractor beam pulling stuff up off the ground and, slipping it into inventory. I think that universally we can all agree is that that iteration of a tractor beam is not what we would consider the ideal to be for piracy. I mean, maybe for some people, but if you've ever manned the tractor beam stations on the Caterpillar and, you just see it's almost like it's going to be a turret view, and you want to be able to, say, grab something and navigate it through 3D space and then place it in the cargo bay or right next to it. And my idealized version of how that works is very close to that, and then maybe like a multi-tool variation that has a tractor beam attachment to it, that you would get it close to the door, and then a player inside that cargo bay could then kind of grab onto it with their smaller tool that has maybe a much more limited range, and then pull it in and place it nicely within the confines of the cargo bay. That is kind of the ideal of what I think it should be, me personally. Not, obviously, other people have different ideas. But in order to get to that point, it goes much beyond just designing a simple tractor beam mechanic, and simple being, relative. One of the big things that we face is the problem of Star Citizen servers, and the fact that realistically, from the outside looking in, it looks like they just cannot handle the game. For everything that is said about all the bugs in Star Citizen, I think you have to give credit where credit is due. When you get kind of kicked out of the game, it's always a 30K error or something like that. It's very, very rare in the game currently that the client actually crashes on you. I think I've had maybe one client crash in the last month. All my disconnections have been 30K. All of them. And 30K is not something that is a product of your game client directly. It's something that happens on the server end, and you get disconnected from the server. So for me, when I'm looking at the problems with Star Citizen, the core client is not, there can be optimizations, obviously, and there's probably a lot of real estate that can be kind of clawed back in terms of performance with optimizations, but the client, for me, is not all that problematic. Most of the problems that I experience are products of the server. And I think that, when we see kind of new features creeping in, it's sort of like other features kind of get quietly pushed away. And I feel that The real problem for Star Citizen is things like socks, server meshing, and things like that, which are going to optimize server performance. And the way that the game is now, the way that it feels to me as a player and not a programmer, is that the server just cannot keep up with the load. It's just too much. And that is, that is one of the big problems. And I think that in order for you to kind of create these roving NPC ships that are loaded with cargo, I mean, the very basic thing that you have to have existing in the game before we even talk about tractor beams and piracy, we have to have that. And the truth is I don't think the servers can handle that right now. I think that we are a couple of really big features away in terms of, server-side performance before we could think to include something like that. I think that as kind of viewers and, backers of Star Citizen, and the way that the content is given to us, we get unintentionally misled, partially by ourselves and partially by CIG, though I 100% think it's unintentional. It's not like they're deceiving us, we must rebel, or any kind of situation like that. But I think that because, we want to see cool stuff when we watch, Star Citizen Live or whatever. We want to see cool new features. But what we're not seeing is the programming end as much as we should probably be seeing it. And I think that, that content is a little dry and it's a little boring, but I think it's also extremely informative in how we can kind of judge the progress of the game. And I think that when we're constantly looking, it's like, hey, and I'm as much as guilty of it as anyone. Hey man, the Star Runner, but as we kind of look at these new features and we go, hey, this new ship, hey, this new thing, and hey, this new gun, it's, it does lightning blasts, and one day you're going to be able to stun people, and we all go like, ooh, it's going to be cool. But we tend to forget that the engineering, like the back end of the game, it's not where it needs to be. And it's not because of like maliciousness or negligence on CIG's part in any way. I think it's just because they are kind of building something that does not exist, and because we don't really see the engineering end of it, we tend to forget it's there, and we kind of look at the game as like, just make the feature, just give us salvage, just give us piracy, and we forget that chances are what is probably going on, I mean, upon reflection, is that, every time we get a new patch, other things are kind of soft disabled, other types of missions are kind of pushed to the wayside because the rewards are kind of, mediocre, or those missions are just removed, or things like interdiction are just quietly turned off and stuff like that. And it's like, oh no, just for testing purposes and things like that. But I think that realistically, what may be happening is it's just like they have a certain amount of performance budget that they can work with, and then as a new feature comes out, they quietly dial back on other things to kind of buy the real estate out of the performance budget that they actually have right now in order to make these features work. I think that is kind of where CIG is at. They're at their limit, they're at the maximum, and we could go ahead and we could work on salvage, but if we put salvage in the game, we're gonna have to kick out a different career, or we're gonna have to make it really lame so that we can kind of buy the performance budget or buy back the performance budget that we need in order to get that new career in. I think that's just kind of why we're looking at the roadmap for the rest of the year, and it's so anemic in terms of like real concrete features. It's not because they can't do them, or because they're like, oh no, nobody wants salvage, no, nobody wants piracy. Well, piracy, I'm sure there's a lot of people like, no, you should take that out of the game immediately. And, those people are all like criminals in real life. They're terrible people. But I think that what CIG is kind of facing is the fact that even if they could implement all those features today, the servers, I mean, the server alert messages or logs would just be like, server switched on, server at 100%, server on fire, and boom, 30K. I think that without maybe even fully realizing it, we've hit the limit. This is as far as we can go without things like socks and server meshing. Like without these features, it cannot go any further. There's just not enough room to get in things like piracy and things like salvage or medical gameplay or something like that. All these different interactions, all these things going on, the servers are having so much trouble keeping up with the game as it is to add all these other layers of complexity to the game. I think that that's kind of what's going on, is that we are at the outer limits. We have kind of reached the frontier, the edge of the frontier, you know? We've reached the Pacific Ocean. It's just like you can't walk any further. That's the end of it, you know? We've crossed the country. Unless we break the game up in its current state, unless we break the game up to the point where you're quantuming, say, between ArcCorp and Crusader or wherever, is more or less just a loading screen, there is, you know, there's just nothing that you can do.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.